Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are joining us from. My name is Valérie Miquet, and I am the director of the Japan program at the Fondation pour la Recherche Stratégique in Paris. And I am very pleased to welcome you all today as the moderator of this webinar titled Exploring South Korea EU Security Linkages in the Indo-Pacific and Europe. This event is part of the Korea Program on Security and Diplomacy of the Fondation pour la Recherche Stratégique, supported by the Korea Foundation. We are very grateful for their continued support, which allows us to foster dialogue and reflection on crucial issues at the intersection of European and Korean security concerns. Today's session will last approximately 90 minutes and will focus on a central and timely theme, the evolution and prospects of South Korea-Europe cooperation in security and strategic affairs, particularly in light of the ongoing transformations of the international order from the war in Ukraine to the dynamics in the Indo-Pacific and, of course, the evolutions in the United States. We are very fortunate to have with us today three distinguished speakers. Each of them will present their views in turn and will conclude the webinar with a Q&A session. You are most welcome to submit your questions through the chat at any time during the webinar, and I will make sure to relay them to our speakers after all three presentations. So let me now introduce our first speaker. Dr. Will Pike is professor at the Department of Political Science and International Studies at Yonsei University in Seoul. He also serves as Deputy Director of the Yonsei Institute of North Korean Studies and Director of the Center for Security Strategy at the Aerospace Strategy and Technology Institute. His recent research addresses the interplay between domestic and international politics from a global strategic perspective, with a particular interest in the growing convergence between the Indo-Pacific and Euro-Atlantic regions. He will speak for approximately 20 minutes on the importance of South Korea-Europe security cooperation. We will then hear from Marianne Perrondoise, Research Director and Director of the Indo-Pacific Geopolitical Observatory at the Institut de Relations Internationales et Stratégiques, IRIS, in Paris. She is a specialist in maritime security and has published extensively on France and Europe engagement in the Indo-Pacific. She will present for about 20 minutes on developing South Korea-Europe cooperation on maritime security in the Indo-Pacific. Our third speaker will be Dr. Arnaud Levaux, founder of Alta Strategies, member of the Orientation Committee of Asia Centre, and associate professor at Paris Dauphine PSL. A political scientist and experienced analyst of European security and defense policy, he has been closely following the implications of the war in Ukraine on global security dynamics, and he will share his insights during a 20-minute presentation entitled Crossed Perspectives on the War in Ukraine. After these presentations, I will open the floor to your questions and comments that I will relay to our speakers. Once again, thank you for joining us today, and let's begin with Dr. Pike. Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Merci beaucoup. Thank you for inviting me to this interesting webinar. Marianne, thank you, and FRS and Iris, thank you so much. So, and then nice to see you again in our note one more time. All right. Today I was asking you to speak about the importance of South Korea-Europe security cooperation, and then as Dr. Barry Niguat, explained already. It covers not just South Korea and the European countries, but also the Donald Trump, the United States, and it's very interesting, provocative, actions, across the world. Let me just start with Donald Trump in the United States, from South Korean perspective, and my perspective too. The Donald Trump, so United States has been transforming, from a benevolent hegemony, to the predatory hegemony last 6 months. A benevolent hegemony, I mean, pursue a long-term structural interest under the liberal international order, along with many international regimes such as WTO, NPT, and then currency regime, and on so on and on and on. This type of hegemon, the United States before, is in many short-term tactical sectors, to its junior partner countries, and then its aligned, partner countries too. But the predatory hegemon, pursues a short-term transactional interest with immediate, force, and tries to enforce its own long-term repressive rule over its partners and adversaries at the same time. The United States actually moving toward this direction under Donald Trump administration right now. Such a critical change of the United States global strategic posture, puts many allied and aligned, partner countries in a very, very difficult position across the policy dimensions, the military, economy, and then technology, and even, political, regime dimensions. As we witness the United States domestic politics in turmoil right now, it's mentioning about civil war, which is unprecedented in my memory. First of all, the military dimension, Donald Trump administration nearly ended the 75-year-old NATO system. It still is ongoing, and then cooperate with Russia in the Ukraine war. With
Oh, yeah, you are freeze.
NATO, European NATO countries are, threat. The same fear of being bypassed. Huh?
Okay,
Any issue?
we had some connecting issue, but it's going well now. You
Okay.
can go on. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, the same fear of being bypassed in security dimensions are prevail right now in South Korea and Japan and the East Asian countries, as well as in Europe. So similar situation, very similar situation for South Korea and the European countries. Second, economic dimension, I think it's more about tariff and tariff. And then France and then other European countries seriously, consider how to deal with this type of, tariff threat. That's exactly what happening in South Korea and then Japan and then Taiwan and other East Asian countries, not to mention China. And then, but the thing is, Donald Trump's the United States, America, does not care whether you are a friends or foes in tariff dimension. That's a big change of the United States global strategy. Of course, Donald Trump and his administration cannot do whatever he or his administration wants. Already, showing some limits, and for example, showing his whimsical tactics were contained here and there right now. And then along with China and the European countries and then South Korea and Japan too. But again, similar situation for South Korea and Europe. Technological dimension also, many high-tech dimensions become more sensitive and competitive by the United States. And the United States denies so-called sovereign artificial intelligence of its junior partner countries, which is a big problem, for South Korea and other countries. I think it's including, France. France has its own Mistral artificial intelligence model, but it's has a pretty high probability to be banned or the constrained by the United States. Political regime, dimension. Also, I mentioned, the United States domestic politics shows a series of political instability, along with a tendency of democratic backsliding. It harms the like-minded countries such as South Korea and France, their solidarity and integrity in Asia and in Europe, the so-called, liberal democracy. South Korea and most European countries are in the same boat one more time in this regard in 2025, and I think it's in incoming years. So we need to think about how to cooperate together in the multiple security dimension. Multiple security dimension, I mean the security convergence phenomenon it's happening. The two security convergences have been accelerating. Regional and then dimensional perspective. Number one, regional security convergence between Indo-Pacific region and then Euro-Atlantic region has been deepened. South Korea's growing military engagement with the NATO's eastern flank via defense industrial cooperation. At the same time, the North Korea's growing military engagement in the Ukraine-Russia war front line via dispatching 15,000 strong soldiers and the selling of various types of weapons and ammunition to Russia. And then France is a warning to China, of course. If China doesn't constrain North Korea, President Macron said in the Shangri-La dialogue, France will engage in the Indo-Pacific from military perspective. Okay. And then, those European engagement, the South Korea and the North Korea's engagement in Europe actually make a very, very big impact on the East Asian security, structure too. The Russia, North Korea rapprochement, and then South Korea's growing relationship with European partners, especially in Poland and other Eastern and the Eastern and the Northern European countries, actually put the China in a very difficult position, to deal with these two the region's the security convergence. If you have any question, I will detail it later. Okay. And then the United States integrated deterrence system, I mean, coined by the former president, Biden, and then the Democratic Party administration, is in limbo. What we can see from this type of limbo is the Donald Trump administration's change of course in its global strategy. And then that actually push South Korea and then Europe and other say partner countries, aligned partners, to cooperate more in the absence of the United States leadership as a senior partner of both regions. This is a pretty critical change of security structure across the world. And then South Korea and then Europe and then France, of course, are in the center of this structural change. And then dimensional security convergence among military, economic, and then technological security is really happening too. Technology. We are all talking about technology, even though you have no idea what technology is from the political science perspective. But you are actually talking about and then dealing with technological the progress to amalgamate military and economy security at the same time. Defense industry is a good example. For example, this man-on-man teaming, this artificial intelligence-oriented the weapon system is becoming the mainstream of a next generation of weapon system, and then which are led by the United States and China, and of course it's followed by France and then Germany and then UK and then South Korea and Japan also. Canada, of course, are right behind that. This type of dynamics become more complicated, and the multiple factors, not just technological dimensions, but also many other dimensions, including competition between South Korea and then European mainstream countries and major powers in the defense industry, also strategic industry. Cooperation and then competition are already happening in the between these two actors, and the United States get involved in it in a very complicated way too. So South Korea's position toward the European security is, I think it's well known. And then the most important event is happening next week, NATO summit in The Hague. The new president, South Korea's new president, Lee Jae-myung, seriously considered to attend, the summit under the NATO IP4 format. He's now flying to the Canada to join, G7. I think he will meet not only Donald Trump, but also, President Macron, and then other European leaders, along with, the Canadian Prime Minister Carney. But the most important, for this South Korea Europe, security cooperation is not G7, but NATO summit next week. So we are waiting for the confirmation of South Korean president joining this NATO, summit in The Hague. South Korea is closely monitoring the European situations from the security convergence point of view. Before, what's happened in Europe, it has nothing to do with South Korea from a security point of view. Not anymore. Many South Korean experts and the strategists and the decision makers are now truly understanding these connections and convergence of these two regions. And then what France is doing, and then Italy doing, and then the Poland and Lithuania and then Romania doing are very, very important for South Korea's security. And then economy and technology. So this is quite a change of scenery, for South Korea last a few years. And then I hope my European colleagues seriously understand and then embrace this fact of South Korea's changing posture. South Korea's proactive engagement with European security partners is still valid as a like-minded country. South Korea hasn't been abandoned this mindset of like-minded country, the liberal democratic country with a capitalist market economy. So South Korea is not Western European country, but it's regarded itself as one of the Western country from Western point of view. So it is still valid. I think a new government will tone down a little bit of this like-minded country rhetoric, but I think it's still there in the South Korea's foreign policy in coming years. South Korea's the strategic dilemma in foreign policy is happening all over the world, place, and the new Lee government hasn't been specified. The new Lee government's foreign policy portfolio hasn't been specified yet. But the most important issue is the dealing with the United States, of course, and then China, and then North Korea's nuclear situation. And then economic security point of view also, it's maybe emerging as a major issue. Now China is the biggest threat from the economic security point of view, but the United States is also emerging as arguably economic threat by what I explained before, the tariff and then technological constraint and blocking this import and export and all those things. In South Korea's the economic security is compromised in many senses too, just like France and other European partner countries. So then, my questions, to European colleagues is also how South Korea and Europe work together, or in a more blunt way, what is the Europe's approach to make use of South Korea for its own interest? What's the expectation from South Korea, especially under the new the president Lee Jae-myung next 5 years. I would love to listen to your opinions and then perspectives. And more broadly speaking, who are the most appropriate partner countries for European countries and in Europe in general? Now we are under the international global turmoil coined by basically the United States, China competition, and then very whimsical and unpredictably, tactical of the United States under Donald Trump administration, on and on and on. So who are the most likely partner for Europe? My last point before I finish my presentation is artificial intelligence. The France is arguably the only one country to pursue sovereign artificial intelligence, Mistral, aside from the United States and China. And then South Korea decided go for artificial intelligence from sovereign perspective. The new government, President Lee Jae-myung appointed a very skilled but young the engineer of the company Naver to chief artificial intelligence strategies of presidential office. And then this person is the advocate of artificial intelligence, especially for sovereign artificial intelligence. And then it, interpreted in South Korea right now. South Korea will go for sovereign AI, just like, France. How can we, cooperate with each other? Or how can we deal with the United States and China from the artificial perspective, intelligence perspective? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Pike, for your very expansive and complete presentation on the many issues, the convergence of both threats, but also opportunities for cooperation between Europe and South Korea. And I would have many questions to ask to go on from your presentation, but now I will leave the floor to Marianne Perrondoise for a presentation on maritime security and cooperation between Europe and South Korea. Marianne, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I assume that you are seeing my slide on the screen. Can you
Yes.
confirm?
At
Yes,
least I
okay.
do, yes.
Okay, I was a bit anxious about that, because speaking of maritime security and speaking of cooperation in the Indo-Pacific, imply to project some map, at least, to clarify what I'm going to say and to, of course, insist on the strategic geography and share concern regarding South Korea, EU, including France and some other EU member states that we used to see regularly sending their navy in the Indo-Pacific. France is a resident country, and has already deployment and permanent naval forces on the theater. But we have we saw recently quite a dynamic regarding an upgrade and of enhancements of naval presence of EU navies within the Indo-Pacific, namely Italy, UK, namely Germany, Belgium, etc. And it's really something that are very positive development and which are offering more possibility of cooperation at sea with the South Korean Navy. So I'm happy to make you dive in the Indo-Pacific water for a couple of minutes. And first of all, I would like to insist, sorry, is my second slide. I spoke of strategic geography. Well, when you consider a map, obviously you are in a maritime area, and you can expect that security issues that littoral states are facing, and especially island states, are by construction maritime, and you can expect a specific focus on the development of navy, but also you can expect some specific focus regarding freedom of navigation, control of the sea lane of communication in a global perspective. But you can also imagine that the control of their respective maritime domain is of great importance for the littoral state, having in mind the recent accent on the blue economy and the importance of fighting any illegal activities at sea, and notably EU fishing, illegal and unreported, unregulated fishing, which are common topic both for EU in its close maritime domain, and of course for South Korea, who is nearly an island regarding the length of its coast. So I have put on my slide some element just to give you a broader perspective. And I will narrow this perspective as soon as I will go deeper in my slide. So the importance of the maritime element in the Indo-Pacific. And first of all, the renewed importance and interest of South Korea, France, and the EU regarding the term, the concept of Indo-Pacific, not only the geography, but also what it means when you have adopted a strategy, an Indo-Pacific strategy, which had a very strong security, and I repeat, maritime security component. This perspective, this common perspective of these three main actors converge when it came to the promotion of international order at sea. And of course, this is speaking about respect and enforcement of the Convention of Montego Bay, the Convention on the Law of the Sea. And when you consider, and we will see that in more detail, the vastness of the maritime theater of the Indo-Pacific, which is composed by two big oceans, the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, you can expect that security of the sea lane of communication is something very important, because it links to the prosperity and exchange and the trade, and of course the autonomy and the resilience of the supply chain, which became a very sensitive and important topic for the main economic actor, trade actor. And EU is, of course, a major commercial, trade, and economic actor, having some strong economic interest in the Indo-Pacific. And evidently, obviously, it's the same for South Korea. That is nearly an island. I really love this metaphor. I do not know, Voyol, if my South Korean colleague love to hear me describing South Korea as nearly an island, but I think it's speaking by itself when looking at a map. And of course, the main pillar of the Indo-Pacific vision of South Korea, France, and the European Union, apart from this strong accent on maritime security and sea lane of communication and freedom of navigation, is of course this accent on multilateral cooperation. And especially a preference for I will say, minilateral mechanism, trilateral mechanism. So going deeper in my presentation, I mentioned just for your information, but you all know that I mentioned the Indo-Pacific strategy that was recently published by the three main actors. Of course, France, which had an Indo-Pacific strategy, elaborated both by defense and the foreign ministry. And which is actually under review, and maybe we will have a new publication, an update of the French Indo-Pacific strategy in the coming week. And France was very convincing and enough convincing to bring EU to adopt an Indo-Pacific strategy. And to go beyond the traditional economic cooperation that is a main link between EU and Asia and Indo-Pacific, and try to elaborate also a security approach and try to I will say calibrate some element of security and defense in its Indo-Pacific strategy. And of course, we had South Korea with the presidency and President Yoon having published an Indo-Pacific strategy in 2022, which is mainly inspired by the new Southern policy which is a traditional focus on South Korea, putting a specific accent on ASEAN and the development of ASEAN country. And maybe we will go back to this traditional definition. I do not see for now, according to the last declaration of President Lee Jae-moon, any appetite for even the word of Indo-Pacific. And so maybe we will see South Korea returning to the traditional New Southern policy. I remember during Moon Jae-in, this constant reference to ASEAN and the need for South Korea to be more involved in the maritime security in the South China Sea and to develop a kind of capacity building cooperation to the benefit of the regional Coast Guard. So going deeper, time is running. What did this Indo-Pacific strategy have in common? Well, the reference to the preservation, the security of a free, open, and inclusive. Inclusive is something very important. It's a name that it's a verb, an adjective, sorry, which is often quoted in the strategy of South Korea, EU, and France, and of course the reference to the rule-based Indo-Pacific, a rule-based order, and of course the three partners are fully aware of the growing, I would say, concern and tension in the region regarding maritime security and putting at risk freedom of navigation. When you look at the map of the South China Sea, when you look at expensive and level of activity at sea and tension that the PLA Navy is developing around the Taiwan Strait, you can consider that speaking of the defense of freedom of navigation is something really very important. And the three partners are fully aware of the great power competition. They are fully aware and refer regularly in the statement regarding maritime security in the Indo-Pacific to maritime border and excessive maritime claim, which can, when you consider the maritime geography and importance of the strait in the Indo-Pacific, which can pose a risk and a threat to the continuity and the resilience of the maritime sea lane and the globally speaking, the maritime trade, and can put at risk the supply chain and the exchange and flow of goods between the EU, Asia, between Asia and EU. And we had a perfect example of this concern and the global cooperation of Asian naval power and the EU naval power, having in mind the threat of piracy of the coast of Somalia and the fact that the three partners and EU notably had still some assets deployed in the region in the fight not only against piracy but in prevention of illegal activities at sea. And so it's really very important to see this quasi-permanent, even modest presence of EU as an actor with the EU naval operation in the region for over 10 years because it's beginning in 2008. And it's have been prolonged, developed by other capacity building initiative to the benefit of maritime domain awareness in the whole country. So just to put some, I will say, concrete element of what I'm saying, just this map, which clearly shows the importance of the sea lane of communication, and notably between Northeast Asia, that is to say, not only China and Japan, but of course South Korea, and this traditional and main sea lane of communication going through the Western Pacific, going through the South China Sea, going through the Strait of Malacca, which is really very important, and navigating through the coast of East Africa to reach to go to Middle East or to reach the Suez Canal. And so you are fully having a very concrete illustration of the importance of the maritime domain, of the control and the freedom of navigation, the control of this sea lane of communication, both for EU, for France, and of course for South Korea. And just to give more precision, you had this map with, of course, not only the main sea lane of communication, the main shipping route, but also the secondary one. And you have, of course, the major straits, the major choke points, which need to be open and which is perfectly, I will say, enshrined in the free and open Indo-Pacific. This is really keeping this maritime door open for trade. And you can see number 8, the Strait of Malacca in the South China Sea. You can see also the Suez Canal and the importance of all of these choke points in the global geography. Well, maybe going a little quicker, I just wanted to give some maritime identity and to see the common maritime concern. And maritime, I will say, well, I repeat identity because EU and South Korea not only in terms of security, but in terms of economy. I insist on the EEZ. The both partners have very, very large EEZ, so they can't neglect their maritime domain. They can neglect to develop some naval assets and to elaborate a maritime strategy. They are both heavily dependent from maritime transport. This was illustrated by the map I showed to you with some figures which are very eloquent. 19% of South Korea trade which is coming by sea, and it's nearly the same for EU. And of course, this lead to EU and South Korea being recognized as maritime actors. And they had quite an importance when it came to commercial port. I will mention Busan, for example, and on the European side, Rotterdam, the largest European port. I will mention the possession of important, largest world shipping company, both on the side of Europe and also with Hyundai merchant marine on South Korea side. And I will insist also on the duality of the civil and military shipyard, both for Europe and South Korea. And this is really very important because this has to deal with the capacity to produce your naval equipment, to produce your warship, your submarine, and to repair them. It's really crucial for strategic autonomy. And it is so crucial that it is something which is important for South Korea. And I understand that there are some discussion between US and South Korea because US is facing some problem regarding the cadence of this naval building capacity. And there are some delay in the naval program of US, and they have asked South Korea and the use of South Korea shipyard expertise, naval building expertise to help them to maintain, I would say, sufficient order of battle, naval order of battle. So it's really important to have this capacity of building your own fleet and repairing it. Another slide to insist on the importance of maritime security in the Indo-Pacific, speaking about the challenge which EU, South Korea, France has to take into account if they want to protect a free and open Indo-Pacific. We already mentioned geopolitical rivalries, illicit activities. I mentioned EU fishing, piracy, drug trafficking, but we need to add a kind of rush to the exploration of natural resources. And natural resource, it's not only fish, but it's mineral resources. So you had traditional security issues, but you had new emerging challenge linked to cyber attack, which had a direct impact on navigation, on the maritime domain, and of course, hybrid threat, which refer generally to the gray zone strategies that China is using in disputed maritime area, using the law of the sea, having some specific reading of the definition of the EEZ, or using its fishing fleet, using its Coast Guard as, I will say, naval combat asset to assert its revendication. And so it could be very difficult from time to time to control China according to this hybrid trade. And we can observe regularly some very, very strong tension at sea between the fishing fleet, Coast Guard, and the Navy, between Philippines and China. And I try to organize a table with a kind of, not a hierarchy, but a kind of monography of the main maritime security threat in the Indo-Pacific that EU, South Korea, France as a resident power are facing. Sorry. So I already mentioned the sea lane of communication, freedom of navigation. Of course, we can't forget about the maritime dispute in the South China Sea, but also in the East China Sea. Great power competition, not only in the Western Pacific, but not to forget the Indian Ocean region. And maybe the Indian Ocean region is not a traditional area of deployment for the South Korean Navy, although it participates to the fight against piracy of the coast of Somalia. But it could be an area for the development of future cooperation, for example. And of course, non-traditional trade at sea. I already mentioned piracy, all kind of trafficking, not to forget maritime terrorism, and an overlooked threat, which is shared by many littoral states and many island states in the Indo-Pacific. And we should give more attention to this non-traditional threat, which are related to the protection of the blue economy and the maritime domain of littoral state and island state, and a very important source for their food security when it came to the protection of fish, protection of mineral resource. There is a need to take into consideration, and EU is working deeply on that. The French Indo-Pacific strategy is giving quite an importance to environmental security and the fight against natural disaster, trying to cooperate on what we call HAD, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, another potential field of cooperation between EU and definitively South Korea Navy and France Navy, and it's already the case. And I mentioned also a very recent but very important concern of all of naval actors in the Indo-Pacific, which is the maritime domain awareness, which is having the means to know what is happening at sea. And this is not exactly having a strong navy, but having maybe maritime police, having effective coast guard, and having some specific equipment, and also putting in place and implementing regional maritime security system which allow exchange of information. And we had a specific emphasis on the development of maritime fusion center in the Indo-Pacific. And this is really something interesting in which, again, EU is very involved and in which EU and South Korea can cooperate. Of course, I can avoid to speak about, a major concern for many littoral states in the Indo-Pacific, which is the growing competition, rivalry at sea, mainly between the US Navy and the Chinese Navy, but we can add also the Indian Navy. And I will mention, and I put on this slide, some elements which are some elements which show the naval expansion very concretely of China and the development that China and the effort that Chinese leadership and notably President Xi Jinping made in the development of what we call ocean capable, effective navy. And we had some report, of course, the Pentagon and many reports on the American side, but also CIPRI, for example, or IISS, that putting a specific emphasis on the difference and the fact that there is this naval armament dynamic, which is in favor of China, and not only in terms of quantity, number of warship, number of submarine, but also at the operational level when it is question of quality, because it's good to have aircraft carrier, but if you are not using this or just has a kind of prestige platform, but we are not able to operate it at sea. Of course, this is not very useful when you consider your naval capacity. But it seems that China is making some very strong effort when it came to the use of its naval tool. Going further, I wanted just to insist on the specific of the maritime situation of South Korea, with, of course, a regional environment which is full of tension and unresolved issue with the main neighbor. And first of all, of course, North Korea, China, and also Japan. And with North Korea, there is an issue regarding the prolongement of the DMZ at sea, which is NLS, the northern limit line, and the dispute over this, I would say, maritime frontier between the two countries, but also the fact that North Korea is developing a weapon of mass destruction. Of course, we all know that, and we are has such as a concern in EU and in the regional area about the nuclear capacity of North Korea. But North Korea is apparently looking for a second strike capacity and is trying to build up a sea-based deterrence, and is putting a lot of money and a lot of effort. Also, we do not have, I will say modestly, I do not have specific information regarding the reality of this new orientation of North Korea military effort. We need to take it into consideration and keep it in mind. And of course, I will mention the level of aggressiveness and the level of confrontation and permanent, I will say, dangerous encounter at sea between the North and the South, just by mentioning the sinking of the frigate, the South Korean Cheonan, in 2010, which was sunk by the launch of a torpedo by suppose no submarine, a North Korea submarine. So this is something which is attracting a lot of effort and distracting a part of the South Korean Navy capability, as you can imagine. And you had also with China some regular tension also regarding a definition of the frontier between the maritime border between the two and the EEZ of the two countries. Which lead to the problem of illegal fishing, with a tendency on the Chinese side to send the fishing fleet to overfish in the EEZ, in the part of the South Korean EEZ. And from time to time, we heard about very violent incidents at sea. And so this is also, of course, a problem for South Korean Navy. And I will conclude with Japan by mentioning also maritime tension regarding the sovereignty over the Takeshima Island. This is a name on the side of Japan, of Tokdo on the side of South Korea. And we use in Europe to have a map calling this island Liancourt Rocher. But we do not have any sovereign claim over them. So I will go maybe quicker, just to finish on the perspective of cooperation. Time is running. And all of these elements bring me to emphasize that, of course, South Korean Navy, by its very uncertain regional environment, is paying maybe a priority and attention to this close neighbor, but is also engaged in the development and implementation of a more global posture with involvement in the more global maritime security. South Korea has the capacity to do so. He had a very capable and effective navy with anti-missile defense, with cruise missile, with a strong submarine component, with also a strong Coast Guard component, which can develop international cooperation. And South Korea's Navy is very much willing to extend the scope of its naval operation within East Asia, maybe with a focus on developing maritime cooperation with ASEAN countries. South Korean Coast Guard are very involved in law enforcement project with Vietnam, for example, with Philippines. I already mentioned humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, which is also a growing role for all of the Navy of the Indo-Pacific, and which could be an area to enhance cooperation because there is a specific need regarding the condition of the region, which is very vulnerable to environmental disaster and tsunami and other excessive natural disaster. I already mentioned counter-piracy operation in the Gulf of Aden, but also deployment in the Strait of Hormuz. And we saw also South Korean Navy navigating in the Red Sea in order to protect the national, but also national shipping company against the Houthi attack. And of course, South Korean Navy is very much involved in the development of naval exercise. I will mention RIMPAC, which is a major multilateral exercise led by the US Navy, but with a broader participation. And I already mentioned the field of capacity building. And just to finish, I put a specific accent on the South Korean side, but I would like to say that the EU naval presence in the Indo-Pacific is really growing over this last year, and we saw regular deployment of EU naval assets crossing the South China Sea, crossing the Taiwan Strait. And it's a part of this strategy of signaling to say to the country in the region that EU is concerned and EU is also enforcing the law of the sea and upholding freedom of navigation. And the message is that EU is willing to say that international rules should be observed in this part of the sea as elsewhere. And so this presence is emphasizing freedom of navigation. And this is why you can see the German Navy, of course, the French Navy, which is which have, sorry, very regular deployment as a part of its day-to-day mission. But we can see also Italian Navy sending aircraft carrier and to show their will to defend order at sea. Uh, uh, which can bring them in some uncomfortable situation when crossing the Taiwan Strait, for example, because China is not recognizing this space as an international water, and would like the foreign navy crossing the strait to proceed by notification, for example, and also EU member states are not willing to be in a confrontational position with China. They want to show by their presence and their engagement that they want to see the protection of a statu quo around the Strait of Taiwan, that they refuse the use of force, and that they want every actor to stick to the law of the sea and to the Convention of Montego Bay. And so just to finish, because I'm speaking maybe for quite.
Marianne, je pense qu'il faut laisser de la place au
Okay,
docteur
so
Legault.
I'm concluding there, and you can see on my slide that there are many area of cooperation for EU, South Korea, and France, and they had already a lot of action that I already mentioned, and I will just finish by speaking of the concept of coordinated maritime presence, which is for EU, the use of the EU member state naval tool deployed in the area to carry out mission also for EU, which can help EU to have a kind of permanent presence at sea by using the asset of the member state, of course, on a voluntary basis. And I will stop there and thank you for your patience, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Marianne. And without any more waiting, I will give the floor immediately to Dr. Arnaud Levaux, for his presentation. Please, Arnaud, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And I face some technical issues, so I will ask Maria to upload my presentation, and I will tell her next when we will have to change a slide. So let me begin by expressing my sincere thanks to the Fondation pour la Recherche Stratégique for hosting this discussion, and particularly to our moderator, Dr. Valérie Niquet, for her leadership on the Northeast Asia issues. I also would like to thank Marianne for helping me to face these technical issues, but also for taking the initiative in organizing this seminar and for kindly inviting me to join. And of course, it's also a real pleasure to see once again Dr. Pecky. His research has long been a source of inspirations, and I'm afraid that some of my presentation today will just be a repetition of what Dr. Peck said, but I will also try to answer or give some element of answers to some of the point he raised. So today I will focus on how the war in Ukraine is reshaping. Yes.
Arnaud, sorry to interrupt. Do you see your slide on the screen? Because I'm trying
Oh,
to
I don't see.
Oh my
No,
God.
no, but I think Arnaud, you should go on with your presentation, even if we do not have the
Okay,
slide.
and
Of
after
course,
we
of
can
course.
circulate
Yes,
the
you can
slide to
share.
the
Yes, of course. Thank
participant
you very much
if
for your
needed. Okay.
understanding.
So I was telling that the war in Ukraine is reshaping the strategic landscape between South Korea and Europe. And I will also focus on why this conflict, although geographically distant from East Asia, is accelerating security convergences between the two regions. In a world marked by interconnected crises, Europe and South Korea find themselves at the forefront of a pivotal test for liberal democracies. The Ukraine war, once perceived as only a European tragedy, now presents a litmus test for values, alliance, and strategic coherence. Okay. Geography should not constrain our imagination. The East Sea and the Black Sea are not isolated theater. They are increasingly linked by the actions of actors who see little distinctions between themselves. It's time now to catch up with this reality. We are entering a world of accelerated strategic realignment. Still no slide?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. So I
I'm
will.
struggling.
Okay, so I will try to work on my pronunciations because sometimes I have a very strong French accent. It might be difficult to understand for some of the participants, and the slide will help, but I will try my best. So I said we are entering a world of accelerated strategic realignment. The post-Cold War unipolar moment is gone. In its place, we are now facing increasingly visible geopolitical poles. First, an axis of authoritarian revisionist country led by Russia, North Korea, also China and some other country. We are thinking about Iran these days. They are not aligned by they are aligned not only by ideology, but by a shared goal to revise the rule-based order. Second pole is the United States, whose Indo-Pacific pivot reflects a long-term structural reorientation with mixed implications for its traditional partners and allies in Europe and East Asia. And the third is a still fragmented grouping of liberal democracies in Europe and Asia seeking to assert greater strategic autonomy. And this is what Dr. Peck told us earlier this morning. So this reshaping forces us to reassess dependencies. As the US recalibrates its global footprints, both Europe and South Korea must consider if the US deprioritize one theater, why not another one tomorrow? So today they deprioritize Europe, why not Asia tomorrow? This is a question mark. So security convergence between Europe and South Korea is therefore no longer optional. This is a necessity. Strategic ambiguity from the US only deepens this anxiety. Discussions around NATO burden sharings, doubts about American commitment to Article 5 of NATO treaty, internal US political polarization all contribute to a climate of uncertainty. Meanwhile, democracies in Asia, from South Korea to Japan to Taiwan, but also, if we can extend to Australia, New Zealand, and some other countries, are reassessing their own postures. The fear is not just abandonment, but strategic irrelevance in broader calculation. This asks triggered a fundamental rethinking both in Brussels as the European capital and Seoul. Policymakers are now exploring how to institutionalize bilateral defense cooperation, support rule-based maritime norms, as Marianne just reminded us a few minutes ago, and how to jointly respond to economic coercions. We can think about how to answer to American tariffs. So let me be clear. What binds South Korea and Europe is not just a threat perception, but a fundamental belief in multilateralism, sovereignty, and lawful dispute resolution. These principles must guide the cooperation between the two actors as they are facing expansionism of authoritarian system. So now, let me turn to one of the most underappreciated aspects of the Ukraine war. I mean the North Korea direct military involvement. Dr. Peck mentioned about this, but I just want to remind you that since late 2024, North Korea has reportedly deployed soldiers, artillery, drones, and munitions to support Russian effort, especially in the Kursk region in Russia. This marks the first instance of a North Korean expeditionary contributions since the Korean War and the Vietnam War. This is not symbolic, this is operational. Europe defense planners cannot longer consider the Indo-Pacific as a distant area. When North Korea sent troops in Russia, North Korea is contributing to warfare on the European continent, and it means that a strategic line had been crossed. Moreover, North Korea's support to Russia is not isolated. In a certain way, it can be perceived as a deeper alignment with China, which remains rhetorically neutral, but materially supportive to Russia through indirect means. So together, Russia, China, and North Korea are creating a zone of strategic insulation. The message is clear. Authoritarian regimes are learning from one another and acting with more synergies, even if the three countries are not forming any kind of alliance, and if we don't see a tripartite coordination, but more like bilateral coordination. So the strategic consequences are profound. North Korea military aid is not merely tactical support. It is a form of ideological signaling. By aligning with Russia, North Korea is testing the tolerance of the international community and probing for weak links among democracies. In Europe, this has accelerated calls for a more global perspective in security planning. NATO documents for a few years already are now routinely mentioning the Indo-Pacific, and the EU policy papers highlight a systemic rivalry posed by China and its main partner. So we must consider the possibilities that Ukraine is the first battle in a broader confrontation between models of governance. North Korea involvement signals to Europe that the next conflict zone could just be as easily emerge in East Asia, and that we will face the same advisories and maybe the same actor will be involved. So Europe and South Korea should prepare themselves. They should be ready to face the next potential war and not to focus on the last one. And concerning the war in Ukraine, South Korea's reaction had been notably proactive. The most tangible example is its rapidly growing defense industrial partnership with Poland that Dr. Peck knows very well, and he published very interesting articles on this topic. Now, the relationship between Poland and South Korea. Is now Poland is one of the largest armed procurement program in Europe, with K2 tanks, K9 howitzer, FA-50 light fighters. They are all entering in service across the armed force of Poland, with backed by joint production and technology transfer mechanisms. And I do believe that this is only the beginning. We are witnessing the emergence of an industrial synergy between Korea and Europe. Europe offers long-standing expertise in system integration, especially through NATO interoperability, but also in aerospace or even on nuclear energy. Korea provides speed, resilience, and the capacity to scale. The bilateral value proposition is not only on military, it is also strategic. As Europe deepens its Indo-Pacific presence, as it was illustrated by Marianne a bit earlier, and that at the same time, Korea is expanding its strategic footprint in Europe. So this reciprocal engagement is generating rare convergence of interest. France's Indo-Pacific position can play as a bridge between European and Indo-Pacific engagement. And as it was mentioned by Marianne, Europe presence in the Indo-Pacific can create avenue for trilateral or minilateral cooperations, including Japan, Australia, New Zealand, even Mongolia. Of course, South Korea, with its advanced capabilities and democratic credentials, is a natural partner in these emerging potential coalitions. To sustain this momentum, both sides, means Europe and Asia, and especially Korea, should institutionalize progress through formal partnerships, joint command exercise, and align procurement standards. Words are good, structures are stronger. At the 2025 Shangri-La Dialogue, President Emmanuel Macron articulated what may become a new defining doctrine for the next phase of European engagement in the Indo-Pacific. I mean, the idea of coalitions of independence. This is not a rejection of transatlantic ties or trans-Pacific ties, nor an alignment with China. It is an appeal for a third way, a strategic poster for liberal democracies that never follow the United States automatically, nor accommodate authoritarian coercion. So France, with its Indo-Pacific presence and strategic culture, which is quite unique in Europe, is very well positioned to lead such a grouping. And key priorities can be what Marianne mentioned, but also the topic. So I think we can agree on this. So the key priorities can be upholding the rule-based international order, responding jointly to cyber threats and disinformation, and South Korea is already part of some NATO cybersecurity exercise. Answering freedom of navigation and maritime security in contested water, coordinating response to economic coercions and gray zone pressure, like maybe on tariff, investing together in critical technologies, AI, semiconductor, and as Marianne mentioned, also on blue economy and on the protection of the supply chain. This kind of grouping will not be a bloc, but more like a Europe-Asia network, flexible, but with some values alignment, capable of collective deterrence without ideological rigidity. For South Korea, the implications are significant. If South Korea maintains its principled stance on Ukraine and resists pressure to soften its sanctions posture toward Russia, it will emerge as a trusted pillar of this coalition. If, on the other hand, ambiguity prevails, trust will erode and opportunities for deeper engagement with Europe may narrow. Because, as it was mentioned a bit earlier, the political environment in South Korea has shifted. The election of President Lee Jae-myung as in June 3rd this year marks a moment of recalibrations. President Lee's approach is different from his predecessors in tone and methods. He has ordered the cessation of anti-North Korea broadcasts across the DMZ, which is a symbolic de-escalation gesture. He seeks dialogue over provocation, especially with China. So, with China. So on Ukraine, his position is cautious but firm. In a way, he has reiterated opposition to Russian aggressions and is maintaining support for multilateral sanctions. However, he still resists pressure to provide more military assistance to Ukraine. And of course, there is some question regarding Korean law and Korean constitution and national interest. And at the same time, he has criticized President Zelensky's strategy, but he's not aligned with Russia. Instead, he's trying to preserve a certain room for maneuverability. And this is creating space for Europe. Under President Lee, South Korea is likely to pursue a more autonomous foreign policy, less bound to the US tempo, but potentially more open to cooperation with Europe on equal basis. The challenge and the opportunity for Europe is to ensure that this autonomy aligns with shared democratic norms rather than equidistance. There is a chance that President Lee's pragmatism will not be isolationism. Instead, it could reflect a broad strategic calculation that South Korea can exert greater influence through balanced diplomacy rather than blind alignment. And this raises a cautious optimism, but also concern at the same time. A less confrontational stance toward China could, in theory, open doors for economic diplomacy and regional de-escalation. But if it leads to ambivalence on Russia or Taiwan, it could also weaken deterrence. So Europe must therefore engage early, and it's a good time. President Lee just arrived in office. Lee administration should be invited into high-level strategic dialogues, offered co-leadership on new initiatives, and encouraged to see Europe not as a fallback, but as a primary partner. This means for Europe to recognize South Korean position. South Korea is not merely a junior partner in the Western Alliance. It is a tech powerhouse, a global training hub, a huge industrial country, and a frontline democracy. So France in particular should lead efforts to create bilateral or minilateral strategic roadmap, including South Korea. It can focus on space, cyber or green technologies, even on the defense capabilities. Europe must match rhetorical alignment with practical cooperation. Maybe we can imagine 5 concrete initiatives which can be pursued very quickly. Maybe to launch EU Korea 2+2 dialogue format to harmonize position on critical security issues to reinforce the security and defense partnerships adopted in November last year. They can also expand cyber defense cooperation, including shared threat intelligence platform and coordinated response mechanism. They can also develop joint R&D platform, maybe for missile development, and enabler ISR or other technologies. Maybe we can even think about green defense technologies. They can, of course, enhance maritime domain awareness in Indo-Pacific with patrols coordinated with European and Korean assets. Sorry. Voilà. And they can also institutionalize industrial partnerships in critical minerals, semiconductors, and clean energy, which can strengthen their strategic resilience. So to conclude, the war in Ukraine has exposed a simple truth. Strategic geography is not longer local. South Korea and Europe are bound by common threats and common values. If North Korea fights in Ukraine and Russia deepens ties with China and North Korea, and if the US deprioritize Europe, what are the guarantee for South Korea tomorrow? The only viable response for Europe and Korea is convergence. This is no longer the time for declaration. This is time for strategic planning, technological interoperability, and shared deterrence. It's time to strengthen Euro-Korean partnership, not to face only a 2 days crisis, but to work, on tomorrow's reshaping global order. And this is quite important. Just as an example, to conclude, I was like a few days ago in a security dialogue in Ulaanbaatar, and the Russian delegates make it very clear that according to them, in the new world order, there will be no place for Europe and no place for liberal democracies. They will not even be invited at the table to reshape the world. Of course, this is a strong message I want to deliver. We don't need to agree, and we can show that a stronger partnership between European and Asian democracies is possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Levaux, for your extremely interesting presentation. We do not have much time for questions, and I do not see any questions in the Q&A. So I will ask only one question to Dr. Pike to conclude that web conference. Jumping up from what Dr. Levaux just said, he mentioned many possible potentialities of cooperation between Europe and South Korea, and I would like to have your, it's very new, but what do you think of these possibilities to be concretized under the presidency of President Lee? And what, in your mind, will be the evolution of South Korea regarding all these possibilities or potentialities of cooperation with the European Union or member states in European Union? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for your questions. I think it's important to know this is a new presidency. And the presidency, which is under severe, very high pressure from the United States, Donald Trump administration. And then the new administration, has a task to revitalize South Korea's democracy, as Dr. Arnold Wu said, from the self-coup in the last year, and then impeachment process, and then new presidential election. So it's the new president and his team has his hands up full right now So in that sense, the European countries and Europe itself might be not the first priority, to actually enforce the relationship in many senses. But interestingly, from the internal, say, personnel, the new presidency will actually give quite a lot of attention, to Europe. For most important thing is North Korea in the European, the front line. And then number two is going to be defense industrial and then strategic industrial cooperation. And then number three is going to be our, a lot more times like-minded country cooperation. And then number four is going to be, I predict that, the South Korea will have a pretty serious conversation with France and other, European countries in the, to cooperate in the artificial intelligence development. For Europe point of view, or for, Europe, the European countries, if Europe wants to have better and a stronger relationship with South Korea, European countries can cooperate or give some more signals into South Korea in the strategic partnership. Strategic partnership, it's not just only military cooperation, but also economic and then technological security, security cooperation. So that counts on more time in defense industrial cooperation, as Dr. Arnold Lebu said, and strategic, industrial cooperation. And at the same time, NATO and South Korea has IITP, individual tailored, the thing, and the cyber issue also. And most of all, in South Korea likes, European countries in many senses. A lot of, personal, tourist, communication and cultural communication interaction is become more and more important. I spent, 1 year in an école militaire in Paris in 2023. And then I met so many, French young people and old people to enjoy, South Korean, culture too. And the French culture is very highly regarded in South Korea at the same time. So many senses, again, the new presidency will remain on the course to enforce the cooperation with the European countries and Europe in general, but be more specific. And France, and then Germany, and then Italy, and Spain, those four top countries. Of course, the Great Britain, UK is not a European country anymore, so I cannot just put in there. But give more attention to South Korea, and then give more chances and opportunity, to South Korea to do something in the European, continent. Don't just regard South Korea as it's a far away East Asian country. As we discussed in the last 1.5 hours, we are in the same boat. And then that type of mindset, shared values, and then communitarian sense, probably no ideology, and that it's going to be the cornerstone for South Korean new presidents, to approach the Europe in many senses. I hope the first sign is going to be his joining the next week's NATO summit in The Hague. I think that, I hope so, but it's a 50-50 or 60-40 or something like that. So I hope it's in making, and then give the good impression to European partners.
Okay, thank you very much. We had two very brief questions regarding the possibility for cooperation between Europe and South Korea, to give South Korea the capacity to liberate, it's not the right word, I'm sorry, itself from over dependency on China and dependency on the US, but and also cooperation with EU, South Korea, but also involving other countries in Latin America. But I am sorry, I'm afraid we are over the time, and we have to close the debate now. And you will be able to watch again this web conference on YouTube on the FRS web channel. So please do that, and we keep in touch to go on with this dialogue. Thank you very much to the participants, to your great presentations, and to all the people who watched this web conference from afar. Thank you very much again, and goodbye.
Marianne.
Hey, Foyor,
Hi.
how are you?
Okay.
So see you in Paris in a few
Okay,
days.
see you in
Okay?
Paris next week.
Okay.
I'll text you. Okay.
Okay. You will come to my
Appreciate it.
institute. I'm very happy that you can meet this guy because they are very smart and they are working a lot on Ukraine or defense industry and so on. So
Oh
they are
yeah.
really the right person. And sorry, it seems to me that I slaughter the presentation of